The morning sun cast long shadows across the abandoned city of Denver as Marcus Thompson adjusted his rifle scope, scanning the desolate streets below from his perch atop the fortified high-rise. 3 months had passed since the outbreak began, and the world he once knew had crumbled into a nightmare of flesh-eating monsters and desperate survivors. The communication tower behind him crackled with static, the last link to other survivor colonies scattered across the wasteland. Marcus, a former Army Ranger turned reluctant leader, had gathered a diverse group of survivors in what was once Denver's financial district, transforming the 30-story building into an impenetrable fortress. Below him, the streets teemed with hundreds of zombies, their decaying forms shuffling aimlessly through the debris-strewn avenues. But these weren't the slow, mindless creatures from the early days of the outbreak. Something had changed in the past week. The infected had begun moving with purpose, organizing into packs, and displaying an intelligence that chilled Marcus to his core. Dr. Rebecca Hayes, the group's resident scientist and former CDC researcher, had been studying the evolution of the virus from her makeshift laboratory on the 15th floor. Her findings suggested that the pathogen was adapting, creating a new breed of zombie that retained fragments of human cognition while maintaining their insatiable hunger for flesh. The fortress housed 47 survivors, each playing a crucial role in their collective survival. Jake Morrison, a former firefighter, had become the group's engineer, rigging elaborate defense systems throughout the building. His wife, Amanda, served as the chief medic, tending to the wounded and sick with supplies scavenged from nearby hospitals. Tommy Rodriguez, barely 18 but possessing an uncanny ability to move silently through zombie-infested areas, had become their primary scout and scavenger. Elder statesman William Bill Carter, a retired military strategist, helped Marcus plan their defensive operations and coordinate with other survivor groups via radio. The building's lower floors had been completely barricaded, with only one heavily fortified entrance on the ground level. Motion sensors, tripwires, and improvised explosive devices created a deadly maze for any intruders. The survivors had established a complex system of rope bridges and zip lines connecting nearby buildings, allowing them to move between structures without touching the ground. Solar panels installed on the roof provided limited electricity, powering essential systems and communication equipment. As Marcus continued his morning watch, movement in the distance caught his attention. Through his scope, he observed something that made his blood run cold. The zombies weren't wandering randomly anymore, they were forming organized groups, with some appearing to direct others through primitive gestures. Dr. Hayes had warned him this might happen, but seeing it firsthand was terrifying. The infected were learning, adapting, and potentially planning. The radio crackled to life beside him. "Marcus, this is Phoenix Base," came the voice of Colonel Sarah Mitchell, leader of a military survivor group stationed 50 miles south. "We're picking up massive zombie movements heading northeast. Our satellite imagery shows hordes converging on your position. You need to prepare for a major assault." Marcus's jaw tightened as he processed the information. They had known this day would come, but the timing couldn't be worse. Their food supplies were running dangerously low, ammunition was scarce, and several group members were recovering from injuries sustained during their last supply run. He activated the building's internal communication system, his voice echoing through the corridors. "All survivors to battle stations. This is not a drill. We have confirmed reports of incoming zombie hordes. Implement Defense Protocol Alpha immediately." The building came alive with purposeful activity as survivors rushed to their assigned positions. Windows were sealed with metal shutters, weapons were distributed, and the children were moved to the secure shelter on the 20th floor. Dr. Hayes burst through the stairwell door, her face pale with urgency. "Marcus, I've been monitoring the infected through the security cameras. They're not just moving toward us randomly. They're being led by something intelligent, something that understands tactics. This isn't just another horde attack, it's a coordinated assault." She handed him a tablet displaying footage from various street cameras. The images showed zombies moving in formation, with certain individuals positioned strategically to direct the others. As the sun climbed higher, casting harsh light on the approaching nightmare, Marcus realized that everything they had learned about survival was about to be tested. The zombies weren't just evolving, they were becoming something far more dangerous than mindless monsters. They were becoming an army, and the final fight for humanity's survival was about to begin. The fate of their small community, and perhaps the entire human race, would be decided in the coming battle. The tension in the fortress was palpable as Dr. Rebecca Hayes worked frantically in her makeshift laboratory, her hands shaking slightly as she examined fresh tissue samples under the microscope. The specimens had been collected from recently deceased zombies that Tommy Rodriguez had managed to eliminate during his last scouting mission, and what she discovered made her stomach churn with dread. The virus wasn't just mutating randomly, it was evolving with purpose, creating neural pathways that shouldn't exist in dead tissue. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, she could see microscopic structures that resembled a primitive communication network, connecting infected cells in ways that defied everything she knew about biology and death. Marcus found her hunched over her research notes at 3 a.m, empty coffee cups scattered around her workspace like monuments to her sleepless dedication. "Rebecca, you need to rest," he said gently, but she looked up at him with eyes wide with terror and discovery. "Marcus, you don't understand. This isn't just an infection anymore. The virus is creating something entirely new. These zombies aren't just evolving individually, they're developing a collective consciousness. Look at this." She showed him microscopic images on her computer screen, pointing to thread-like structures connecting brain cells. These neural bridges shouldn't exist in dead tissue, but they're not just existing, they're thriving. The infected are sharing information, experiences, even basic tactical knowledge through some kind of biological network. The implications hit Marcus like a physical blow. If the zombies could communicate and coordinate on a level beyond simple pack behavior, their small group of survivors stood no chance against the thousands of infected roaming the streets below. Dr. Hayes continued her explanation, her voice growing more urgent with each word. "I've been monitoring their movement patterns through the security cameras, and the data confirms my worst fears. The zombies aren't just following pheromone trails or sound anymore. They're displaying strategic thinking, setting up ambushes, and even using basic tools. Yesterday, I watched a group of them construct a crude ramp to reach a second-story window. They're problem-solving, Marcus, and they're getting better at it." As if summoned by their conversation, Jake Morrison's voice crackled through the intercom system. "Marcus, you need to get to the observation deck immediately. We've got a situation." Racing up the stairs, Marcus found Jake and Bill Carter staring through binoculars at the street below, their faces grim with concern. What Marcus saw through his own scope made his blood run cold. The zombies weren't just gathering in larger numbers, they were organizing into distinct formations. Some infected stood motionless like sentries while others moved in coordinated patterns, clearing debris and creating pathways. Most disturbing of all, certain zombies appeared to be directing the others through deliberate gestures and movements. "They're planning something," Bill said in his gravelly voice, his military experience evident in his tactical assessment. "This isn't random migration or feeding behavior. They're conducting reconnaissance, testing our defenses, and preparing for a coordinated assault. I've seen enemy forces do exactly this before major offensive operations." The old strategist's words carried the weight of decades of military experience, and Marcus trusted his judgment implicitly. The radio suddenly burst to life with static, then cleared to reveal an unfamiliar voice. "This is Dr. Elizabeth Morgan at the Whitmore Research Institute. If anyone can hear this transmission, we have critical information about the infection. We've been working on a potential cure, but our facility has been compromised. The research is still here, but we need immediate assistance. The compound is located in the medical district, approximately 12 miles from downtown Denver. Please respond if you can hear this message." Marcus grabbed the radio microphone, his heart pounding with sudden hope. "Dr. Morgan, this is Marcus Thompson, leader of the Denver Survivor Group. We can hear you clearly. What's your situation?" The response came back filled with desperation and fear. We're trapped in the underground laboratory levels. The infected have overrun the surface facilities, but the research data is intact. We've made significant progress on a cure, but we need healthy survivors to help us complete the synthesis. The zombies here are different from the early infected. They're using tools, setting traps, and working together like a military unit. Dr. Hayes, who had been listening intently, grabbed the microphone. Dr. Morgan, this is Dr. Rebecca Hayes, former CDC researcher. I've been studying the viral evolution. The infected are developing a collective intelligence through neural networking. How close are you to a working cure? The silence stretched for several agonizing seconds before Dr. Morgan's voice returned, heavy with both hope and desperation. We're perhaps 72 hours away from a working prototype, but we need fresh tissue samples from the evolved infected and access to specialized equipment. The problem is, the zombies seem to understand what we're trying to do. They're actively preventing us from gathering the materials we need. As dawn broke over the city, Marcus realized their situation had become infinitely more complex and dangerous than a simple survival scenario. The attack began at dawn with an eerie silence that sent chills down Marcus Thompson's spine as he watched from the observation deck. The usual moaning and shuffling sounds of the infected had completely ceased, replaced by an unnatural quiet that blanketed the city streets like a funeral shroud. Through his binoculars, Marcus could see hundreds of zombies positioned strategically around the building, standing motionless like soldiers awaiting orders. Dr. Hayes joined him at the window, her face pale with exhaustion and fear. "They're waiting for something," she whispered, her scientific mind racing to understand the unprecedented behavior. This level of coordination shouldn't be possible, but they're demonstrating tactical patience that rivals military units. The first sign of the assault came not from the streets below, but from Jake Morrison's frantic voice over the intercom. "Marcus, we've got movement in the underground parking garage. The motion sensors are going crazy, but I can't see anything on the security cameras." Before Marcus could respond, a series of explosions rocked the building's foundation, sending vibrations through the steel and concrete structure. The zombies had somehow accessed the building's lower levels through the storm drain system, bypassing the heavily fortified ground floor entrance entirely. Jake's voice crackled through the static again, filled with disbelief and terror. "They're using explosives. Crude devices, but effective. They've blown through the drainage grates and are flooding into the parking levels." Marcus activated the building-wide emergency alert, his voice echoing through every floor. "All survivors to defensive positions. The fortress has been breached. Implement lockdown protocol immediately." The building erupted into controlled chaos as survivors rushed to their assigned battle stations. Amanda Morrison grabbed her medical supplies and headed for the secure treatment area on the 20th floor, while Tommy Rodriguez and his scouting team prepared to defend the critical stairwells. Bill Carter, despite his age, moved with military precision to coordinate the defensive response from the command center. The elevator shafts suddenly filled with horrifying sounds of scraping metal and inhuman growls. The zombies had found another way in, climbing up the elevator cables with supernatural determination and coordination. Jake's engineering skills became crucial as he frantically activated the emergency systems, sending the elevator cars plummeting downward in an attempt to crush the climbing infected. The impacts echoed through the building like thunder, but the climbing sounds resumed almost immediately. "They're learning from each failure," Jake reported grimly. "The ones behind are avoiding the same mistakes as the ones in front." On the 15th floor, Dr. Hayes worked desperately to secure her research data while the sound of breaking glass and splintering wood grew closer. The zombies had begun using tools and improvised weapons, smashing through barricaded windows and doors with coordinated efficiency. She could hear their movements becoming more organized, more purposeful with each passing minute. The virus wasn't just creating a hive mind, it was allowing the infected to learn and adapt in real time, sharing successful strategies instantly across their collective consciousness. Tommy Rodriguez's voice cut through the chaos as he engaged the first wave of zombies to breach the 10th floor. "They're not just stronger and faster than before. They're using teamwork, covering each other's advances, and setting up ambush positions. It's like fighting a trained army." the young scout's observation proved prophetic as the zombies began demonstrating increasingly sophisticated tactics. Some infected created diversions while others flanked the survivors' positions. They used crude shields made from debris and coordinated their attacks to overwhelm defensive positions. The situation deteriorated rapidly as zombies breached multiple floors simultaneously. Amanda's medical station was forced to relocate twice as the infected pushed higher into the building. The carefully planned defensive positions that had worked against mindless hordes proved inadequate against organized, intelligent opponents. Marcus found himself fighting alongside Bill Carter on the 18th floor, their ammunition running dangerously low as waves of zombies pressed their attack with relentless determination. Dr. Hayes made a critical discovery as she analyzed the infected behavior through the remaining security cameras. "Marcus, they're not just trying to kill us. They're herding us upward, forcing us into a specific area of the building. This isn't random violence, it's a calculated strategy." Her words proved correct as the survivors found themselves pushed steadily toward the upper floors, their defensive perimeter shrinking with each passing hour. The zombies had somehow understood the building's layout and were systematically cutting off escape routes while driving the humans toward a predetermined location. As the sun reached its zenith, casting harsh shadows through the broken windows, Marcus realized that their fortress had become their prison. The zombies controlled everything below the 25th floor, and their coordinated assault showed no signs of slowing. With ammunition running low, injured survivors mounting, and the infected displaying ever-increasing intelligence, the group faced their darkest hour. The fortress that had protected them for months was falling, and with it, their hopes of survival seemed to crumble like the debris-filled streets below. The infected had breached the 22nd floor by midnight, their coordinated assault showing no signs of fatigue or hesitation. Marcus Thompson found himself in the horrifying position of fighting enemies that learned from every encounter, adapting their tactics with each failed attempt to reach the survivors. The building's interior had become a nightmarish maze of barricaded corridors and improvised defensive positions, with the constant sound of scraping claws and breaking glass echoing through the ventilation systems. Dr. Hayes had barricaded herself in the communications room, desperately trying to maintain contact with other survivor groups while the infected systematically destroyed the building's infrastructure. Tommy Rodriguez had volunteered for the most dangerous mission of his young life, leading a small team through the compromised floors to reach the building's maintenance areas and seal the breaches that continued to allow zombies inside. Armed with welding equipment and explosive charges, Tommy moved through the darkened corridors with the stealth that had kept him alive since the outbreak began. Behind him, two other survivors, David Chen and Lisa Parker, carried additional supplies and watched for infected ambushes. The zombies had learned to set traps, using their own kind as bait to lure survivors into kill zones where multiple infected could attack simultaneously. The team reached the 19th floor stairwell access point, where Tommy could hear the horrifying sounds of zombies systematically testing every door and window for weaknesses. Through hand signals, he directed David to prepare the welding torch while Lisa kept watch for approaching infected. The plan was simple but extremely dangerous: seal the stairwell access points with metal plating, forcing the zombies to find alternative routes that the survivors could more easily defend. As Tommy began cutting metal sheeting to size, the sound of the torch attracted unwanted attention from the floors below. Meanwhile, Amanda Morrison had transformed the 20th floor medical station into a field hospital under siege conditions, treating wounded survivors while the sound of combat raged just floors below. Her supplies were running critically low, and she had been forced to make impossible decisions about which injuries to treat first. Jake Morrison worked frantically beside her, rigging motion sensors and alarm systems to provide early warning of approaching infected. The couple had barely spoken since the assault began, their focus entirely consumed by their respective survival tasks, but their teamwork remained seamless despite the mounting pressure. The first zombie reached Tommy's position with terrifying speed, its decayed hands reaching through the partially welded barrier with supernatural strength. David reacted instantly, using the welding torch as a weapon to drive the creature back, but the bright flame and his screams of terror attracted more infected from the surrounding floors. Lisa opened fire with her rifle, the gunshots echoing through the building like thunder, but each muzzle flash revealed more zombies approaching from multiple directions. The team found themselves surrounded, with their escape route blocked by the very barriers they had been trying to construct. Dr. Hayes monitored the situation through the building's remaining security cameras, watching helplessly as Tommy's team fought for their lives in the narrow corridors. She could see the zombies' tactical evolution in real time as they learned to coordinate their attacks, with some infected creating diversions while others flanked the survivors' positions. The virus had transformed them into something far more dangerous than mindless monsters. They had become a learning, adapting collective intelligence that grew stronger with each encounter. The breakthrough came when Tommy realized the zombies were avoiding certain areas of the building, particularly sections where electrical systems remained active. Using his knowledge of the building's layout, he directed his team toward the emergency generator room, where the constant electrical hums seemed to create a barrier the infected were reluctant to cross. The discovery provided temporary safety, but it also revealed another terrifying aspect of the zombies' evolution. They were developing specific fears and aversions, suggesting that their collective consciousness was becoming more sophisticated and complex. As dawn approached, the survivors had been pushed back to the upper 5 floors of the building, with the infected controlling everything below the 25th level. Amanda's medical supplies were nearly exhausted, and several survivors had sustained serious injuries during the night's fighting. Jake's defensive systems had been largely overrun, and the building's infrastructure was failing under the constant assault. Most critically, their ammunition was running dangerously low, with some survivors down to their last few rounds. Marcus gathered the remaining survivors in the command center, where Bill Carter had been coordinating their defensive efforts throughout the night. The old strategist's assessment was grim but honest. They could not hold their position much longer. The infected had demonstrated the ability to learn and adapt faster than the survivors could develop new defensive strategies. Dr. Hayes joined the meeting with devastating news from her research. The zombies' collective intelligence was accelerating, and they were beginning to display problem-solving abilities that suggested they might soon be capable of complex planning and abstract thinking, making them virtually unstoppable. The emergency meeting convened in the command center felt like a war council planning humanity's last stand as Marcus Thompson looked around at the exhausted faces of his fellow survivors. The morning light streaming through the reinforced windows seemed almost mocking, illuminating the grim reality of their situation with harsh clarity. They had lost 12 people during the night's assault, and the remaining 35 survivors were trapped on the building's upper floors with rapidly dwindling supplies and no clear path to safety. Dr. Hayes spread her research data across the table, her hands trembling with exhaustion and the weight of what she was about to reveal. "The cure is real," she began, her voice barely above a whisper but carrying the power to change everything. "Dr. Morgan's research at the Whitmore Institute has confirmed what I suspected. The virus creates its collective intelligence through specialized neural proteins that can be neutralized with the right compound. But synthesizing the cure requires fresh samples from the evolved infected, and the equipment at the research facility is the only place where we can complete the process." She paused, looking around the room at faces that reflected both hope and terror. "The problem is that the facility is 12 miles away, through the heart of zombie-controlled territory, and according to Dr. Morgan's last transmission, the infected there are even more advanced than the ones we're fighting." Bill Carter studied the city map spread across the table, his military mind calculating distances, obstacles, and probability of survival. The route to the medical district passes through 3 major zombie concentration zones. We'd be moving through areas where thousands of infected have gathered, and they'll be expecting us. Based on their demonstrated learning ability, they've probably already anticipated that we might try to reach the research facility. His weathered finger traced possible routes across the map, each path seeming more impossible than the last. Jake Morrison looked up from his inventory reports, his face grim with the harsh mathematics of survival. "We have enough ammunition for maybe 6 hours of sustained combat, assuming we're extremely conservative with our shots. The explosives I've been saving might clear us a path through one major obstacle, but after that, we'd be relying on luck and determination." He set down his clipboard and looked directly at Marcus. "The truth is, most of us won't make it. Maybe a small team could slip through, but moving the entire group would be suicide." The weight of leadership pressed down on Marcus like a physical force as he processed the impossible mathematics of their situation. Stay in the fortress, and they would all die when the zombies eventually reached the upper floors. Attempt to move everyone to the research facility, and most would die during the journey. Send only a small team, and those left behind would face certain death, but the mission might succeed. Amanda Morrison spoke up from her position near the medical supplies, her voice steady despite the exhaustion in her eyes. What about the children? We have 7 kids under 15 in this group. They can't make a run through zombie territory, but they can't survive a siege either. Dr. Hayes had been listening to the debate with growing desperation, knowing that every hour they delayed meant the zombies grew more intelligent and organized. There's another factor we need to consider, she said, pulling up footage from the security cameras. The infected are displaying what appears to be strategic patience. They're not pressing their attack as aggressively as they could, which suggests they're waiting for something. Based on their behavior patterns, I believe they're trying to capture us alive for some unknown purpose related to their evolution. Tommy Rodriguez, who had barely survived the night's mission, raised his hand tentatively. What if we split into 2 groups? A small team makes the run to the research facility while the rest fortify the upper floors and try to hold out long enough for the cure to be developed. It's still a long shot, but it gives both groups a chance. The young scout's suggestion sparked intense debate among the survivors, with some arguing for a unified approach and others supporting the division of resources and risks. Marcus found himself studying the faces of people who had become his family over the past months, knowing that his decision would determine who lived and who died. The radio crackled to life with Dr. Morgan's voice, weaker now but still determined. Denver survivors, this is Whitmore Institute. Our situation is deteriorating rapidly. The infected here have begun using tools and coordinated tactics. We estimate we have perhaps 48 hours before they breach our final defensive barriers. The cure research cannot be completed remotely. It requires hands-on work with the specialized equipment here. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting long shadows across the city where thousands of evolved zombies waited with inhuman patience, Marcus realized that there was no perfect choice, no strategy that would save everyone. The decision he made in the next few minutes would determine not just the fate of his group, but potentially the future of human civilization itself. The impossible choice lay before him: sacrifice some to save others, or risk everything on a desperate gamble that might save no one at all. Marcus Thompson's decision came with the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders as he addressed the assembled survivors in the command center. We're splitting into 2 teams, he announced, his voice carrying the authority of leadership despite the tremor of uncertainty beneath. Team Alpha will consist of myself, Dr. Hayes, Tommy Rodriguez, Jake Morrison, and 6 volunteers. We'll make the run to the Whitmore Institute and attempt to help Dr. Morgan complete the cure. Team Beta, led by Bill Carter and Amanda Morrison, will fortify the upper floors and hold position until we can return with the cure or until. He couldn't finish the sentence, but everyone understood the implications. The selection process for the mission volunteers proved to be one of the most heart-wrenching moments in the group's history. David Chin immediately stepped forward, his young face set with determination despite the terror in his eyes. I'm going. I'm fast, I can shoot, and I don't have family here to worry about. Lisa Parker, the former police officer who had joined them 2 weeks earlier, nodded grimly. Count me in. Someone needs to watch Tommy's back, and I know the medical district better than most. 2 other survivors, Maria Santos and Robert Bobby Williams, volunteered despite the obvious danger, understanding that the mission represented humanity's only hope for survival. The preparation for departure took place under the constant threat of zombie advancement, with the infected having reached the 27th floor during the night. Jake Morrison worked frantically to assemble every explosive device he could create from their remaining supplies, fashioning crude but effective bombs that could clear temporary paths through zombie concentrations. Amanda Morrison divided their medical supplies between the 2 teams, keeping enough antibiotics and bandages to treat the wounded who would remain behind while ensuring the mission team had adequate first aid supplies for their dangerous journey. Dr. Hayes secured her research data and the precious tissue samples in a reinforced case, understanding that the scientific information she carried might be more valuable than any weapon. She had spent the early morning hours in radio contact with Dr. Morgan, coordinating their arrival and learning about the specific equipment and procedures they would need to synthesize the cure. The conversation had been interrupted multiple times by sounds of combat from the Whitmore Institute, with Dr. Morgan's voice growing increasingly desperate as the infected pressed their assault on the research facility. The escape route Jake had planned utilized the building's window cleaning equipment and rope systems to descend to the 15th floor of an adjacent building, avoiding the zombie-controlled lower levels entirely. From there, they would use the interconnected skybridge system to move across several city blocks before descending to street level at a predetermined extraction point. The plan was risky but represented their best chance of avoiding the massive zombie concentrations that had gathered around their building. As Team Alpha prepared to depart, the emotional goodbyes threatened to overwhelm the survivors' resolve. Amanda Morrison embraced her husband Jake with tears streaming down her face, both knowing they might never see each other again. "Bring back that cure," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Make this sacrifice mean something." Tommy Rodriguez, despite his youth, had become a surrogate son to many of the survivors, and his departure left several of the older group members struggling to maintain their composure. The descent began at dawn, with Tommy leading the way down the rope system while Marcus and the others provided covering fire for any zombies that might appear in the adjacent building. The infected had learned to post sentries in elevated positions, and the team encountered immediate resistance from zombies that had somehow reached the higher floors of surrounding buildings. Lisa Parker's police training proved invaluable as she coordinated the team's movement through the skybridge system, using hand signals to communicate and maintain tactical spacing. The first major obstacle came when they reached the Meridian Tower skybridge, where a large group of zombies had gathered as if anticipating their route. Jake's explosives cleared the initial wave, but the sound attracted hundreds more infected from the surrounding area. The team found themselves in a running battle through the connected buildings, with ammunition running low and zombie reinforcements arriving faster than they could eliminate them. David Chin sustained a severe bite wound to his left arm during the fighting, but managed to tourniquet the injury and continue with the mission. The final descent to street level proved to be the most terrifying part of the journey, as the team rappelled down the side of the Commerce building while zombies gathered below like hungry spectators. Tommy's scouting skills became crucial as he identified a narrow alley that provided temporary cover from the main horde. The team moved through the city streets using abandoned vehicles and building debris for concealment, but the zombies' enhanced intelligence made stealth increasingly difficult. They seemed to anticipate the survivors' movements, setting up ambushes and coordinating their pursuit with frightening efficiency. As they approached the medical district, the devastation became apparent through the massive zombie concentrations surrounding the Whitmore Institute. The research facility was under siege, with thousands of infected pressing against its defenses in organized waves that suggested a level of tactical planning that chilled the survivors to their core. The Whitmore Research Institute loomed before them like a fortress under siege, its imposing concrete and steel structure surrounded by thousands of zombies that moved with the precision of a military blockade. Marcus Thompson crouched behind an overturned ambulance with his team, studying the facility through binoculars while the infected maintained their organized perimeter around the building. The zombies weren't just attacking randomly, they had established patrol routes, guard positions, and what appeared to be a command structure that defied everything the survivors thought they knew about the undead. Dr. Hayes whispered urgently beside him, "They're not trying to break in through brute force. They're conducting a systematic siege, testing defenses and waiting for the perfect moment to strike." Tommy Rodriguez had spent the past hour conducting reconnaissance of the facility's exterior, using his stealth skills to map the zombie positions and identify potential entry points. His report was grim but not hopeless. The main entrance is completely overrun, but there's a service tunnel that connects to the hospital next door. If we can reach the hospital's basement level, we might be able to access the research facility through the underground maintenance corridors. The plan was dangerous, requiring them to move through zombie-controlled territory and navigate unfamiliar underground passages, but it represented their only viable option. The radio crackled to life with Dr. Morgan's increasingly desperate voice. "Denver team, if you can hear this, our situation is critical. The infected have breached the upper laboratory levels, and we've been forced to retreat to the underground bunker. The cure synthesis equipment is still functional, but we're running out of time. The zombies here are displaying problem-solving abilities that suggest they understand what we're trying to accomplish." Her transmission was interrupted by the sound of breaking glass and inhuman screams, followed by static that sent chills down Marcus's spine. Jake Morrison had been studying the facility's blueprints that Dr. Hayes had downloaded from the city's architectural database, identifying the specific laboratory where the cure research was being conducted. The underground bunker is 3 levels below ground, accessed through a series of security doors that require electronic keycards. If the power grid is still functioning, we might be able to reach Dr. Morgan's team, but we'll be trapped down there with no easy escape route. The engineer's assessment highlighted the mission's desperate nature. They were essentially volunteering to be buried alive in a zombie-infested research facility. The approach to the hospital required crossing 2 city blocks of open ground while avoiding zombie patrols that had learned to coordinate their movements and communicate through primitive signals. Lisa Parker's police training proved invaluable as she guided the team through the urban wasteland, using abandoned vehicles and debris piles for cover. David Chen, despite his infected bite wound, pushed forward with determined courage, his injuries serving as a constant reminder of the stakes they faced. The antibiotics Amanda had given him were slowing the infection's progression, but everyone knew he had perhaps hours before the virus claimed him. The hospital's basement level had been transformed into a nightmarish maze of medical equipment and zombie remains, with evidence of fierce fighting scattered throughout the corridors. The team moved cautiously through the darkness, using flashlights sparingly to avoid attracting attention while searching for the maintenance tunnel that would lead them to the research facility. Maria Santos, who had worked as a hospital administrator before the outbreak, proved invaluable in navigating the complex layout and identifying the correct passage. The tunnel system beneath the medical district was a claustrophobic nightmare of concrete corridors and mechanical equipment, with the constant sound of zombie movement echoing from the levels above. The team crawled through maintenance shafts and utility passages, following outdated blueprints while the infected seemed to track their progress through vibrations and sound. Tommy's scouting abilities became crucial as he identified zombie concentrations and guided the team around potentially fatal encounters. The breakthrough came when they finally reached the research facility's basement level, where they discovered that Dr. Morgan's team had barricaded themselves in a reinforced laboratory surrounded by the facility's most advanced security systems. The automated defenses had been keeping the zombies at bay, but the power grid was failing, and the electronic locks would soon cease functioning. Through the reinforced glass, they could see Dr. Morgan and 3 other researchers working frantically with complex equipment while zombies pressed against the outer barriers. The reunion was both joyful and terrifying as Dr. Morgan explained the cure's synthesis process while zombie attacks intensified above them. "We need fresh tissue samples from the evolved infected to complete the compound, but every specimen we've collected has been contaminated or degraded. The virus seems to have developed a mechanism to destroy itself when the host dies, making it nearly impossible to study the active neural proteins." Her words carried the weight of potential failure, but Dr. Hayes had anticipated this problem and carefully preserved tissue samples in specialized containers during their journey. As the facility's power systems began to fail and the zombie siege intensified, the race against time entered its final phase, with humanity's survival hanging in the balance. The laboratory's emergency lighting cast eerie red shadows across the walls as Dr. Morgan and Dr. Hayes worked frantically to synthesize the cure while the sound of breaking glass and twisted metal echoed from the floors above. The facility's automated defense systems had finally failed, and the zombies were systematically breaching each level with the methodical precision of a military assault. Marcus Thompson coordinated the final defense from the laboratory's entrance, where Jake Morrison had rigged explosive charges to seal the corridor when the infected inevitably reached their position. The cure synthesis required 47 minutes to complete, but Marcus estimated they had perhaps 20 minutes before the zombies overwhelmed their defenses. Tommy Rodriguez and Lisa Parker had positioned themselves at the laboratory's secondary entrance, using the last of their ammunition to hold back waves of infected that seemed to understand the critical importance of stopping the cure's completion. The zombies no longer attacked with mindless hunger, they moved with calculated purpose, using coordinated tactics and improvised weapons to break through the survivors' defensive positions. David Chen, despite his worsening infection, had volunteered to guard the ventilation shafts, knowing that his sacrifice might buy precious minutes for the cure's completion. The breakthrough came when Dr. Hayes successfully isolated the neural proteins from her preserved tissue samples, allowing the synthesis process to begin in earnest. "The compound is bonding correctly," she announced, her voice barely audible over the sound of combat. "But we need to maintain the temperature at exactly 98 degrees for the next 30 minutes, or the entire batch will be useless." Dr. Morgan's team worked to maintain the delicate equipment while the building shook from explosions and the systematic destruction of the upper levels. Bobby Williams and Maria Santos had been positioned in the corridor leading to the laboratory, where they made their final stand against an overwhelming tide of infected. Bobby's sacrifice allowed Maria to retreat to the laboratory's outer chamber, where she helped Jake Morrison prepare the final defensive barrier. The engineer's expression was grim as he calculated the remaining explosive charges and ammunition. "We can hold them for maybe 15 more minutes," he told Marcus. "After that, we're down to hand-to-hand combat." The zombies' collective intelligence had evolved to the point where they seemed to understand that the cure represented an existential threat to their survival. Their assault intensified with desperate fury, with infected throwing themselves against the barriers in coordinated waves designed to exhaust the survivors' ammunition and break their defensive lines. The sound of their coordinated attacks created a symphony of horror that echoed through the facility's corridors. Dr. Morgan made a critical discovery as she analyzed the cure's molecular structure. The compound works by disrupting the viral neural network, but it needs to be deployed as an aerosol to be effective against large populations. "We can synthesize enough for a localized release, but distributing it globally would require manufacturing capabilities that no longer exist." Her words carried the weight of limited hope, but Dr. Hayes had anticipated this challenge and proposed using the building's ventilation system to create a localized cure cloud that could neutralize the infected in the immediate area. As the final minutes ticked away, David Chen's infection reached its critical stage, but instead of succumbing to the virus, he retained his human consciousness while gaining insight into the zombies' collective network. "They're afraid," he whispered to Marcus through the intercom. "The viral intelligence knows what you're doing, and it's terrified of extinction. That's why they're attacking so desperately." His unique perspective provided crucial intelligence about the zombies' coordinated assault patterns, allowing the defenders to anticipate their movements. The moment of truth arrived as the cure synthesis reached completion, but the laboratory's defenses had been breached on multiple fronts. Jake Morrison detonated his final explosive charges, sealing the main corridor but trapping the survivors in the laboratory with no escape route. Tommy Rodriguez and Lisa Parker had exhausted their ammunition and were fighting with improvised weapons against infected that showed no sign of retreating. The cure was complete, but deploying it required someone to reach the building's ventilation control room 3 floors above their position. Marcus made the ultimate decision, volunteering to carry the cure to the ventilation system while the others defended the laboratory. His journey through the zombie-infested building became a desperate race against time, with infected pursuing him through corridors littered with the remains of the facility's former staff. The cure's deployment succeeded, creating an expanding cloud of aerosol that began neutralizing the infected throughout the building and surrounding area. The epilogue revealed the cure's limited but crucial success. The immediate area around the research facility had been cleared of infected, creating a safe zone where the surviving population could begin rebuilding. Dr. Hayes and Dr. Morgan worked to establish production facilities for the cure, while the remaining survivors honored the memory of those who had sacrificed everything for humanity's survival. The world remained largely infected, but hope had been restored, and the foundation for humanity's eventual recovery had been laid through the courage and sacrifice of ordinary people who refused to surrender to extinction.